Hey, Red Pill Mormon here. Just driving my truck again. Um, so I listen to a lot of podcasts and stuff while I'm driving my truck and on my headset here, and listen to some really cool music from Zion Media Music, Zion Bros, whatever. Anyway, but I was listening to talks by Elder Russell M. Nelson, and some commentary, and they're talking about like, oh, we're trying to raise up a Zion people and all of this stuff. And I have a problem with that because Zion people doesn't just build temples all over the earth. They do all that God has commanded. And if they don't do that, according to Genesis chapter 9 of the Joseph Smith translation, it says that when a people do all that I have commanded, and that is a capital all, then they shall establish Zion below, and they shall look up, and Zion shall come down out of heaven with the church of the firstborn. Now, this has to happen in order for Adam and Undiaman to happen. And that has to happen before Jesus Christ returns. So there has to be a people who will be willing and living all that God has commanded. And um, from a restoration standpoint, like the restoration's ongoing, and I agree with that because um, because of Section 124, where they were supposed to build a temple where the Father would restore the fullness of the priesthood. So that has to be a thing as well, um, which did not happen in Nauvoo. Like I've said in past videos, all the things that Jesus said would happen if they were obedient did not happen, and everything that Jesus said would happen if they were disobedient, that's actually what happened. So when you look at all of the things that happened, and the fact that Jesus Christ said, if you don't do what I say, you'll be rejected as a church with your dead, I have to look at that and say, okay, well, what was the rejection? The rejection was that they were rejected from receiving the fullness of the priesthood. Also, the amount of revelation that was supposed to come out of the Nauvoo temple, that never happened either. Jesus said this would be the beginning of revelations, and I believe that he meant the revelations so that Zion could be redeemed. But the fullness of the priesthood did not happen then, and it has not happened since. In fact, Jesus said, all they who hinder this work will be cursed to the third and fourth generation, which if you take Moses' generation in the wilderness, which was one, that was 40 years. 40 years times 4 generations is 160 years. And Joseph Smith, according to the Lyman White Journal, Lyman White wrote down in 1843, when he was one of the leaders of the church, that Joseph Smith said that we are at a poor fallen state. We have been rejected as a church with our dead, which was what Jesus said would happen in January of 1841. So we know that the Father and the Son never came to that Nauvoo temple, neither did any heavenly messenger. So 160 years actually later, from 1843 was 2003, when I saw the Father and the Son face to face and was given the fullness of the priesthood, as well as the keys of the kingdom, the church, and the priesthood. Okay, with all that, I was also sealed up unto the Father and given the sealing keys. So the one man on the earth who holds the authority that is talked about in Doctrine and Covenants section 132, Joseph Smith was the one man at that time, because when he was given his calling and election, he was sealed up unto Jesus Christ. And through Joseph Smith and the law of adoption, where people were sealed to Joseph Smith, through that link on the earth, they were sealed up through Joseph Smith to the fathers and the mothers in the heavens. So, and Brigham Young also talked about, like, we have to have our genealogies. We have to do. Everybody has to be sealed all the way back to Adam. Well, That was Joseph Smith. He was sealed through through Jesus Christ to Adam. So anyway, but then there's the other things too. If you want to be a Zion people, where are your united orders? That is a commandment. It's part of the law of consecration, and they are not to be found. 17 million members of the church, and 180 years after the, or maybe it's 200. I don't. Well, no. Well, 180. 195. I think it's 195 years since the restoration of the church on the earth in 1830. You don't have any united orders. None. 17 million members and billions in the bank, no united orders. What about the law of plural celestial sealing? Where's the church in that? Does it happen? I'll let you be the judge. Gathering to one place. Where is that? In I think it was 1911, Joseph F. Smith was called to testify at the Reed-Smoot hearings in Congress, and they stopped gathering to one place at that time. And Joseph F. Smith came up with a false revelation. Well, he didn't even call it a revelation. He's just like, now everybody has to stay where they're at. But that was a revelation from Congress, not from the U.S. government, not from God. In fact, there have been no thus saith the Lord revelations since Joseph F. Smith or before. So there's a lot of other things that were part of the church in the early days which are not part of the church now. Rebaptism is one. People would be rebaptized when they felt like being rebaptized, but also a lot of times they would get rebaptized before they went and did their endowments, or they would get rebaptized before they got married. And then they would have rebaptism for other things as well, but we don't do that anymore. Also, this water and wine thing with the sacrament, in Doctrine and Covenants section, I think it's 29, Jesus says make wine or strong drink for the sacrament of your own make. It has nothing to do with water. Bruce R. McConkie wrote the section heading where he said, oh, it's water now, but that's not what the Revelation says. We're supposed to be using wine or strong drink of our own make for sacrament. What about kneeling for sacrament? The congregation is supposed to be kneeling for the sacrament, but they don't do that anymore either. There are hundreds of things which were done in the early days of the church according to the revelations of God, which are not being followed in these days. So what would happen if the church actually got all of this stuff right and they were actually doing everything that they were supposed to be doing? Well, Doctrine and Covenants section 85 and Isaiah chapter 28 talk about the one mighty and strong coming among the drunkards of Ephraim, whose priests and prophets are out of the way. And this is in the last days. Also, Jesus said that he had to send someone mighty and strong to set the house of God in order, which implies it would become out of order, which it has. So there's also Daniel chapter 12, which talks about the holy people in the last days having their power scattered. What does that mean? The power is the priesthood, and the holy people are the people of the restoration. July 15th of 2013, the Father told me to use the authority he had given me to sever the ordinances and the priesthood of all the holy people. This was a fulfillment of Daniel chapter 12, which I did not know. I didn't realize that that was a fulfillment of Scripture for a month after that, when my aunt called me up and she says, that thing that you did, that's a fulfillment. And I read it and I was like, holy, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. Anyway, so why was that necessary for the setting in order? It's a hard reset because of things which have happened in the church. One of the main things that happened, what needed that to be required, was that Heber J. Grant in the 1920s stopped conferring priesthood and made that church policy, No revelation was given with that. Heber J. Grant said that during near the end of his life that the heavens were as brass to him, and he had not received any revelation from the Lord. But he sure did do a lot to change the church. He changed the word of wisdom. He changed a bunch of stuff. But one of the big things is that they did not confer priesthood. They only ordained to offices from 1921 to 1957. So that was the administration of Heber J. Grant, George Albert Smith, and finally David O. McKay. David O. McKay changed it back, and he wanted to go back and have everybody be rebaptized and reordained and all of this stuff and resealed, because like a lot of priesthood had a break in the link, and so a lot of people were not receiving priesthood in the church because during this time period of 37 years, I think it was 36 years, they were not conferring priesthood. So if you had priesthood before that, so the guy that gave me the priesthood was born in, I think it was 1901, and he had received the priesthood before this break, and then so he had the priesthood, and if he was ordaining people the way the church was saying, he did not give any priesthood to anyone between 1921 to 1957. But then after it was changed back, he was giving priesthood properly with conferral of the priesthood and ordaining to an office within the priesthood. So there would be people through his line that would receive priesthood after 1957. But many people do not have the priesthood because they had people in their line of authority which were not being properly ordained for in that 36-year time period. So if you have somebody in your line of authority who received their priesthood during that time, it is very, very clear that there was a break in the line of authority because priesthood was not conferred. That's why there had to be a hard reset. Because it was a very big surprise to me. Why do you want me to sever the power of all the holy people? Why do you want me to sever or to cut off the ordinances and the power of all the holy people? He said, because if they will not accept you as my witness, I will not accept them. Now, in 2003, I received the authority to do the things that God has asked me to do. This is the work of the Father, which is spoken of in 3 Nephi chapter 21. Go and read that for yourself. It is above the work of the Son. It is above the work of the church. It is where the remnant go to that Isaiah speaks about so much in his writings. And in other places as well, where the prophets have spoke of the remnant that would come forth in the last days. And these are the people who will do all that God has commanded, and they will be the ones who redeem Zion. It will not be the leaders of the church who do that with the work of the Son. This is the work of the Father. So what would happen if they did everything that they were commanded to do? They would still not have the authority for the law of adoption. They would not have the authority to seal up the children on the earth to the fathers and mothers in heaven, which is a fulfillment of Malachi, where it talks about turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. There's so much more depth that the church does not understand with these things. But I have been given that authority. That's why it is important to receive your baptism under my hand or under somebody who I have set apart for that purpose, who has received it before you from me. And that is why it is important for you, men, to be sealed up to me through the law of adoption, so that you can be sealed up to me, through me, to the Father and to the Son and to the fathers and mothers in heaven. And that so that your wives and your children can be sealed up through you, through me, to them. When a people live all that I have commanded, Zion will be redeemed. You cannot do it all and have that redemption without me involved, because I am the key holder. Rather, or whether people want to accept that or reject that, that's up to them. And I understand why people wouldn't reject it, and they would call me crazy and all the fun things that they want to, like slander my name, whatever. But this is the reality of the matter. Also, when Joseph Smith saw Moroni the first time, Moroni told him that the man of Acts chapter 3, verses 22 and 23 is Christ, but the day had not yet come when he would be rejected by his people. But that day soon would come. Jesus Christ had already been rejected by his people. But I have not. I am Messiah ben Joseph. Joseph Smith was not rejected by his people either as a whole. I have been rejected almost as a whole by my people. The man of Acts chapter 3, 22 and 23 is a Messiah or a Christ, an anointed one, the anointed of the house of Joseph. That's me. And in that scripture it says, the man like unto Moses, if they will not hear him, which means to shema, which is a Hebrew word which means to listen, hear, and obey, they will be destroyed from among the people. Now, how does that happen? It is because those people who will not hear will not, hold on.